The drought will end. Can I go home now? When? Who? It's getting better. Just a little bit of background. Some of you know some of my background. I'm not a native Coloradan. My connection by marriage did connect me to a homesteader family in eastern Colorado who are still on, well, they were on irrigated farm, but they've given their irrigation water back to the Republican. And so now it's dry land operation with a bunch of cattle. But I am native to Illinois, never aspired to be a Colorado climatologist, but I wanted to be a climatologist from the time I was about little, because something about numbers and data was really fun for me. And as you'll see, I'm going to throw numbers at you and see if you can stay awake after lunch. I cut it down this year. We're less than 100 slides. But drought was what we were talking about when I came to work in '77. Had to write a description of how you would communicate drought to the general public audience in Colorado. That was part of my job application. And I knew in Illinois, where I grew up, it was pretty obvious if I was taller than the corn, we were dealing with drought when it was August. And if the corn were taller than me, it was not a problem. And drought there was a problem, but an infrequent problem. And still, their driest year on record is still wetter than your wettest year on record. So today, what are we going to do today? Oh yeah, this is, did you honestly think that you would see this again in your lifetime? The rolls of rolling dust, and not let alone to become accustomed to it, which is what many of us in the lower valley have done now over the last, well, it's been a little over a year. I mean, it was dry in 2011, it was really dry in 2012, but the dust didn't really start rolling until 2013, and has kept rolling ever since. As best I could tell, it rolled last night, did it not?
It did. Yes.
Anybody driving in it?
Yes.
It was not a pretty sight. And then it rained, because my car was covered with mud this morning, so I presume that was a mud rain. But at least rain is better than no rain. But no, I honestly say I was a member of the Colorado Blowing Soils Task Force, and I'm guessing he was too, and just can't remember, in the late 70s and 80s. And it was abolished at some point, sort of quietly. We're trying to figure out who even knows and has the records of the old Blowing Soils Task Force. But we thought it was likely, with the advent of the Conservation Reserve Program and taking marginal cultivated lands and restoring them to vegetation, we thought that blowing soils would not be much of a problem. But what did we find? If you're dry enough, warm enough, long enough, ugly things happen again. Here's what we're covering today. I gotta say thank you for the sources of our data, because as a climatologist, data is what we live on, and I will talk about the current and potential future climate status, and I will introduce our special guests, who you may have not even met yet, who are the National Weather Service people from the River Forecast Center down in Tulsa, who are your forecasters for the Arkansas River. And you guys have to get used to saying Arkansas in some states and Arkansas in others too. At least in your written messages, it all comes out the same. But National Weather Service, we give them thanks. I give them thanks regularly. They have maintained ongoing historic observation networks, and in the Arkansas Valley, they've been particularly rock solid over the years, not so much in all parts of the state, but we have long-term data collected quite consistently. We probably have some weather observers in the room who've helped with some of the long-term data collection, and it's really, really valuable, the National Weather Service Cooperative Observer Program. Of course, you know about the SNOTEL and snow course. And by the way, we're still working to defend manual snow courses, which are of a different sort of value than the real-time automated data, but the 1-2 punch of the two data sets that NRCS has collected through the snow survey programs over the years have been of huge value to the state. And I will give you guys a fair credit for a couple observing systems. COAGMET, and again, Lorenz has been a big help for that in southeast Colorado. We limped along for many years until Kansas filed suit against us and found that our data wasn't as good as we wish it was, at which time we have improved our ET monitoring using weather station data. And also, you may not know, but when I think of the Bob Appel Award, I think of Bob Appel as a man who helped launch COCORA's, volunteer weather observers in southeast Colorado, teamed up with Jane Woostrow, who's also been a big part of the forum over the years. I'll show you a graphic of that in just a minute. And then I just love coming down to the valley for your meetings, because I have learned that you are a lot of fun folks, and I've learned history. You have historical opportunities in different communities. It's a great thing that you have going here. Don't give it up. Keep rolling. Where are you going to be next year? I'm anxious to go somewhere else. I haven't spent my...
Pueblo.
Maybe Pueblo. Very good. We didn't get to bowl this year. I hadn't done my talk yet. I gotta give you guys credit too for your maintaining senses of humor under tough times and dealing with tough situations, and yet doing so with judiciously crazy humor. I love it. Yes, if you wondered what COAGMET is, some of you don't know the Colorado Agricultural Meteorological Network. There's maps on these projections. They're pretty small, but if you look, thanks to the Upper Arkansas Water Conservancy District, we have headwater stations in the valley, in irrigated areas, right on down to Holly, where weather stations like this ticking along. We would love to get those transitioned to real-time reporting as opposed to cell phone. Most of them are doing once a day hourly data, but only communicating once a day. Some are doing it hourly, but we would love to be able to communicate that in more real time for more purposes. And thanks to your support for keeping that going and making it ever better. You've got a great network down here. Yes, our backyard rain gauge network, Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network, that's what COCORA stands for. Notice gauges here. Some of them have your name on it. We are looking for more volunteers. This was what it was back at the 2003. I think this was the first forum that I came to. I believe was in 2003. It might have been 2002. Not exactly sure. But after meeting with Bob Appel, this is what happened in 1 year. Look at the impact in southeast Colorado. That was remarkable. He said, "This is important to the valley. Let's do it," and he did it. Now, since then, it sort of went gangbusters nationally. You'll see that the Ark Valley itself hasn't necessarily made more progress since then. So I suggest it's time for another boost. And today would be a good day for that. But through our continuous monitoring, we keep learning and we keep seeing what's going on. You know this, summers are warmer than winters. They always have been, they always will be. Higher altitude is cooler than lower elevations. There's little subtle nuances on that, but that's largely going to be the case. And superimposed on those nice smooth averages is how weather really happens, and this is the last year's water year. And if you look at the hottest day of the year, I believe that was the day that the Black Forest fire erupted, and then the worst of the fires rolling in the Rio Grande were going on right about that time. Last year was closer to normal than the 2012 year, but you'll still see that we're on the warm side more often than we've been on the cool side. Yep, you know where we fit in. Here we are. There's the Gulf. There's where moisture comes from. There's the Pacific. That's where moisture comes from. If it wasn't for the mountains to squeeze that moisture out one more time, we would be in trouble. but we got those mountains there to give it one last chance of squeezing out when it comes from the west, and a chance of having to rise up on those few occasions when the moisture arrives from the east. And so we got that special chance to get a little more moisture in an area that would otherwise be total desert. Find your favorite part of the valley here, and you'll find that yes, it is dry. And thank you for having that little piece of the arc that sticks all the way up in the north central part of the state to squeeze out this much more reliable water supply that arrives in that part of the basin. And by the way, I pulled this map out from the 1930s climate atlas that was done for the state when the Colorado Water Conservation Board had just been created. And lo and behold, if you look in the small print, this beautiful map, and it's largely, if you look closely, it's largely the same. They got the dry spot a little farther north than we show it, whoopsie, now, but they got it in the right valley, that's for sure. And they also did seasonal distributions of precipitation and superimposed on that map. Guess what? That was a WPA project, this precipitation map and the climate analysis that went to it. They put people to work studying the climate of Colorado, and I think that's pretty awesome. Did you know that this is what the average precipitation patterns look like month by month, January through February? Yes. Once you're in the lower valley, midsummer is when the bulk of your precipitation falls. We are ramping up this time of year, but compared to the northeast Colorado, the South Platte, you don't get much in the spring. But by the time you get over the foothills, these are foothill stations: Rye, Colorado Springs, Walsenburg, Trinidad, Monument, Pueblo. There, much more spring precipitation. So spring is important in your headwaters, and then by the time you get to the true headwaters, this would be up in the mountains. Then you see that winter maximum precipitation is the big deal. And the valleys, Salida, Buena Vista, don't get much in winter, while the mountains just a few miles away are squeezing it out. And this is what all you water lovers have to deal with. I love it. Variability, it drives us crazy. No 2 years are ever alike. They never have been. They never will be. That's part of what water management is so fascinating, why doing agriculture in this environment. That would be as measured in Colorado Springs. That would be as measured in Rocky Ford. Yes, there have been months with over 9 inches of precipitation in Rocky Ford. Think about that. Not very many of them, but it has happened. And now I want you to look. This was when I presented this graphic last year at our talk, the long-term, preciously beautiful historic data from Rocky Ford, the research center there, with a 30-year averaging period put in it. And as of last year, we were just about back up to our wettest 30 years running, even though we had these 2 consecutive super dry years. And guess what? We added that next data point, which was 2013. And that was with the help of a good finish with some precipitation in July, August, and September. What was happening without it? We thought we could never match the terrible drought of 2002, and yet last year we were only running about 2.5 inches of precip as we got into July, and finally it made a little bit of a last second finish. Superimposing an 11-year running average, you'll see that there the 40s were the wettest decade in Rocky Ford history. It dropped steadily off. We recovered in the 90s, and now we've been tailing back off, but we're not yet as dry for a long-term period as we were in the 30s or in the 70s. But for the short-term period, there had never before been 3 years in a row like that, which is why you have a new method of economic development down here called drought. You got media coming in from all over the country, and they're asking about historic sites that they can go visit while they're here, which is kind of neat. So they're interested because they've never been here before. It's pretty fascinating. There's Los Animas, which is also now run 3 in a row drier than any previous 3 consecutive. And as you go downstream from La Junta, the 90s were the wettest decade in recorded history. That's changing now thanks to what you're dealing with. Up in Canyon City, not as bad. Coming down, but had a decent year last year, although a lot of that fell in September. And by the time you get to headwaters, this is up at the mine at Climax, which has maintained a weather station since the late 40s. Look at that, that's their wettest consecutive period, even with the dry years going on. So this is it within your own basin. This is the kind of variability that we have to deal with. It is incredible. Statewide, average it all together. There's wet periods, there's dry periods. There's 2002, that was worse than any previous one. There's 2012. Statewide last year was average. Drought here, floods north, average it out, everything's fine. This is straight off the presses of the National Climatic Data Center, which has updated their historic records, and you can now pull things by drainage basin. And these are summer, winter, fall, the dashed upper line, and spring, the dashed lower line, historic temperatures from the late 1800s forwards. And you will see in this graph, and I didn't impose a line, best fit trend line in it, because with variability, sometimes trend lines just mislead you. But it really does show summers have been warmer than historically, not warmer than the summers of the 30s, but over the long haul, a warming trend. Winters had been on a warm run, but now we've stuck some cold ones in recent years. Spring is where the spring temperatures have shown quite a profound warming over these years. That, by the way, it's, what is it, a 10-degree spread, and a 2-degree trend is considered significant on a national scale, and it's more like a 3+ degree trend in spring. So just so you know, your springs, if they felt warmer, they are warmer than they used to be, with the bulk of that change being in the last 20 years. How about evapotranspiration? We don't have long-term evapotranspiration data, but since we implemented the COAGMET weather stations that estimate reference ET, and from that you can use coefficients to estimate crop evapotranspiration. This was the good old days of the moist, high humidity 1990s, and this was what 2012 looked like. This is accumulated ET for the whole growing season, April through September, and that's the dashed line is the long-term average. This is last year, so last year was distinctly better than 2012, but still above average. Many of the years in the 90s were down on this lower end. So yeah, ET have been going on the high range, and I wish I had a better, cleaner, up-to-date pan evaporation history, but what we showed was 90s really had, 80s and 90s relatively low pan evaporation, and that ramped up starting right around 2000. Yes, you know snow is important, and it's also variable. Here's our April 1st data point for the basin as a whole. That is good news. These two previous years were not good news, which is why you guys were also irritable last year at this time. And individual station, that's up near Monarch Pass. Historic records from manual snow courses. SNOTEL does not give you the long history that these manual snow courses do, so that's part of why we want to preserve at least some of the snow courses as best we can. That's up at Fremont Pass. And you know that the stream flow is what matters most. That's the great integrator. This was 1999 when the big flood came through La Junta at the end of April, 1st of May, and then had pretty decent water the whole rest of that year. Then dry conditions emerged soon thereafter, and by 2002, that's what the annual stream flow hydrograph looks like. You didn't have to worry about water management that year. It was not much to manage, although there would have been more in the river if some ditches did get to take a little. This was the last pretty decent runoff year we had, 2008. 2010 had some water as well, but that was what a nice hydrograph. This is at the Avondale monitoring station. So that's a nice long peak flow doing pretty good, and with some summer spikes on top of that. That was what 2012 looked like. Again, not quite as ridiculous as 2002, but darn similar, darn similar. And this was 2013, where thanks to some spring precipitation, because the winter really looked bad, but by the end of March, we got some good. Some of you were, well, there were people in the room from Leadville. I was in Leadville last year at the end of, in the second week of May, and huge snow still falling. And fortunately, that gave us a burst that was fairly short-lived, and we were back down to not so much flows, but each of these bumps ended up being Colorado Springs urban runoff. Thank you, Colorado Springs. You did a fine job. You took some nice heavy rains in El Paso County. And then what was that thing in September?
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a second. Which reminds me, yes, there was a flood. There was a flood. It was mostly our flood, but some of you got unexpected water down here as well. That was what the rainfall pattern for the Front Range looked like for the week of September. Most of the rain was 9th through the 15th. That was upwards of 18 to 20 inches directly over the city of Boulder, and then 12 to 16 inches in the more headwaters regions of the St. Vrain and the Big Thompson, then back down to a little lower elevation in the Poudre. We didn't have as big of a flood, even though we have a bigger basin. And then there's this interesting Aurora, Northeast Denver maximum with 12 to 15 inches of rain there. Huge urban runoff, Sand Creek into the South Platte. South Platte really didn't carry much water at all until Sand Creek came in, and then from each tributary down, it got bigger and crazier. Now we can sort of look that indeed, while the bulk of the storm was to the north, there's this interesting little maximum over El Paso County, and then there was a pretty darn good, in fact, almost 8 inches of rain in one day fell near Carville. Carville. They're now in the top 10 for greatest one-day rainfalls in the state history. They also have really nice tumbleweeds. And some of the heavy rains continued out here, but where you are, the heavy rains managed to skip. You got some, but not much down here. And I do want to give you credit to the basin. You should be proud of this. If you're going to get hammered, might as well take it proudly. You now continue to hold the record for the most rainfall in 24 hours in Colorado. You used to hold it at the Holly Cooperative Station, the 11.08 inch record that stood for many years with the June 1965 floods. They have now been eclipsed by a gauge on Fort Carson, the Rod and Gun weather station, 11.85 in calendar day, September 12th, 12.46 if you shifted that a few hours later and skipped dates. That's a lot of rain in one day, and that's why there was water in Fountain Creek. It was muddy water, by the way, but it was water, and some of you got to use it. That's what the cumulative stream flow for the water year, as measured at the Canyon City gauge, which didn't get those flood peaks coming off downstream. You'll notice that for 2 consecutive years, that's the lowest flows for 2 consecutive years, not the lowest individual flow years, but for 2 in a row, it's the lowest that we got in the historic record. Happy to say that this year should be better. And this is statewide reservoir storage as a percent of average. We climbed up after several years to recover from the 2002 drought. Then we're back down in 2012, and we're climbing. In fact, we're able to put quite a bit of water in storage over the course of the winter in some parts of the state. So, gotta fly. Just these are, I love numbers. I love graphs. I'm sorry. This is starting the clock ticking with the water year of 2010, which was the last halfway decent year down here. This would be the average accumulation each year, up, and then this is the actual. So you'll see at Lamar through 2010 until we got to August of 2010, doing pretty good. and then things quit. We got some rains in the late summer of 2011, and then 2012 was largely a dud. There was a winter event in there that made somewhat of a difference. And then there is the summer rains that did occur starting last June, July, August, and September, which was that was the rain that grew the tumbleweeds. It didn't grow much grass, but it grew tumbleweeds. If it hadn't have rained, you wouldn't have had the tumbleweeds. And there's Rocky Ford, which had a fine year in 2010 and have been really shut down since then. And that would be a deficit of 13 inches. And actually, if you started the clock ticking right then, it would be a 20-inch deficit accrued in 3.5 years. That is why you have the conditions that you see on the ground where you don't have irrigation water. That is pretty incredible. Trinidad got a little more of the summer precip, but they've also been miserably short. Colorado Springs had a heck of a summer last year, but if it wasn't for a couple months, and these end up being, that was about 2 rains that year, that was about 5 good rains this past summer. Other than that, the deficit would likewise be huge. Of course, what matters most is higher up in the headwaters, not so much in Buena Vista, but they correlate with higher elevation. And interestingly, by the time you get to the headwater up at Climax, they've been tracking pretty average for the last 4.5 years. Pretty incredible. 2010, you were feeling okay. Yeah, it was getting drier, but you were feeling okay. 2011, you weren't feeling okay. 2012, you were feeling bad. 2013, you weren't feeling much better. And much of the rest of the country of the plain states were feeling pretty miserable in 2013. Summer came along and it got better in here, let's do that. The plains were getting better. Northern plains were getting a lot better. Even the South Platte and Colorado River Basin were getting a little better. You were not getting better. And finally, with the late season rains, some improvement kicked in, and we were down to only D3 and D4 instead of the widespread D4, which is historically D4 equals something you'd expect to see about 2% of the time in any 100-year time period. So that's pretty rugged drought. And here we are by the end of April. It was starting to expand again, even though the whole, our friends to the north, which is me, in the South Platte doing just fine in terms of water supply, Colorado doing okay, Rio Grande not doing so well, and you folks still struggling, but your headwaters area doing much better. What about this winter? There's temperatures still, again, you'll see them, this is Colorado Springs, more often than not, still on the above average side, although there were a couple of really fine cold waves this past winter. You've got some of that. Snowpack, there was, you'll see on this graphic, 2011, which was a last really good year, in the headwaters, not down here. 2012, very bad. 2013, and then this year, where the several headwaters folks have done quite well. There's Fremont Pass, well above average, still accumulating with prospects for more this weekend. There's Whiskey Creek coming down in the Purgatory, where nothing has been helpful over the years. Finally, something in the last few weeks have brought a little bit of boost down there, but it has been hard to get spring precip and to hold snow in the ground as long as historically has been the case. And basin-wide, average it all together, it looks like a pretty normal year. And by the way, in order to be average, you have to have some above average years. When you get excited about being average, that's good, but somewhere along the line we have to be excited about being above average. So I'm cheering for that. Here's the good news that we got working for us. Better moisture, especially upstream. You did get enough moisture in the summer to make a bit of a difference, but it was mostly weed growing difference, and it did, but some of you are irrigators, and you did get unexpected bursts of water, thanks again to a lot of runoff in the Fountain Creek Basin more than anything. There's distinctly more snow in the mountains right now than we've had the last couple of years. We have had more frequent storms. That was a storm we got last night. It did rain. How much did it rain?
I don't know, it blew so hard it attached rain gauge.
About the best we had was, we had knocked over rain gauges, we had dirt in rain gauges, and about the best we had, I think I saw a 1300ths or something like that over near Lamar. But it's better than not having rain, except that 50-mile-an-hour wind didn't help any. More frequent storms. Oh, by the way, how many days have we had measurable precipitation since January 1st? And measurable would be, if you had one of these gauges, you'd know. 1/100th of an inch. There's a guess of 16. It's not a bad guess. Anybody think higher or lower?
12.
He's going lower.
20.
20. Who said 20? It's 19. Good guess. So we've had 19 days with measurable precip. The typical precip event this year has been about 1/10 of an inch. It's just been hard to get a decent sized storm. So now we're getting to the fun part. The good news is the National Weather Service is here. They will save the day. Stand up. Introduce yourself.
My name is Bill Lawrence. I'm the hydrologist in charge of the River Forecast Center in Tulsa.
What are you in charge of?
The River Forecast Center, part of the National Weather Service.
Yes.
It's the Arkansas-based River Forecast Center in Tulsa. So we have the entire Arkansas River from the headwaters and down to Pine Bluff. And we also have the Red River in the south, which we not to be confused with Red River.
And Tony?
My name's Tony Anderson. I'm just a little peon. I work for him. But one of my focal point responsibilities that I'm responsible for is Colorado and New Mexico in maintaining the model, and I also do the water supply forecasting for the upper reaches of both the Canadian and the Arkansas rivers.
Do you need precipitation?
Forecasts the first week of the month from January through June. And we forecast April through September runoff, or we try to. That uncertainty he's so excited about makes my life miserable. But as he was showing you, the upper Arkansas is looking pretty good as of April 1st. About 100% of normal, maybe a little above that. So slightly above normal. As you move out of the the headwaters down towards Grape Creek and then into I'm going to mess this up, Huerfano.
You got it right.
Way.
The Kuchars, and then down in the Purgatory, the snowpack drops off as he indicated at Whiskey Creek. On the Purgatory, I'm forecasting 49% of normal at Trinidad. And then down at Las Animas, it drops down to about 48. So I wish I had better news on the Purgatory, but the upper Arkansas looks pretty good.
So,
We'll do our best to move I-70 south.
but as you saw, near the foothills, spring precipitation plays a role. And spring precipitation, they sort of, at this point, those forecasts are assuming something sort of in the normal range. And what will actually play out, springs have been pretty dinky, garbagey here in recent years. And you don't get that extra boost. You end up with less than what you were thinking you were going to get. But it can go the other way. And right now, from a U.S. seasonal drought outlook, the projections are for improvements in much of Kansas and all of Nebraska, a little bit of improvement down in New Mexico, but hanging in there, drought holding its grip in your area. That's their current projection. And again, thank you for the warm welcome to the Weather Service for coming today. I'm just delighted. This is an interesting trend. This is looking at spring, the May, June end of precip as it's been occurring in Colorado Springs the last few years. Never before had there been, this is 5 out of 6 years with less than 2 inches of precipitation in the months of May and June. And there's been only about that many in the previous 100 years, and we've strung them in the last few years. An interesting and not pleasant current trend. Hopefully it's a cycle. Summer precipitation, there you see Colorado Springs did their share. They took it for you to get a little water down here. It wasn't coming on the main stem, it was coming down Fountain Creek, but that was their second wettest July, August in recorded history this last summer, while you were still dry as could be down here. And don't forget, it can flood. It did flood to your neighbors to the north, and it's a common way of ending or at least interrupting drought. In the 30s, we had 2 major floods squeezed in to the drought. We have had clusters of floods once the 65 flood occurred. We proceeded to have major floods about every second or third year for the next decade after that. And then we've gone into a fairly flood-free period subsequently. I just want you to be aware, drought and flood can go together. It's not pretty, but it happens. And then some of you are data junkies like me. A few of you are already on our mailing list, but every Tuesday we put out a assessment report, and some Tuesdays we have webinars and folks like Bruce Fickenshire get in and give us some wisdom from Southeast Colorado to keep us rooted in what's really happening. We focus on the Upper Colorado because they were paying for us, but I'm the Colorado State climatologist, so I look at the entire state. And so if any of you want to be a part of our mailing list, just get me a business card today, and I will make sure you get our Tuesday updates. You don't have to be on the webinar, but we'll send you an email with links to our weekly report. And don't forget, we have 2 or more rain gauges, compliments of the National Weather Service, but if you choose to take one, you must sign up for CocoRa's. And I have a computer right there, and if I can get an internet connection, I will get you signed up today. I will stay around to the end of the meeting. I want you to come. Highest priority goes to people who live at least 5 miles from town, in whatever the various towns are down here or in Kansas. We're open to Kansas volunteers. We're signing them up left and right. And there's the website. Anybody can use CocoRa's and CoAgMet, both public data sources for you to use, and very useful, beneficial information. And you can also use the Colorado Climate Center's Climate Trends website if you want to keep tabs on how things are changing and varying over time. I think I'm done, and we'll have time for a question or two.
Any questions?
Okay. You know, we, in Canyon, on September 11th, we had about 5.25 inches. But obviously, our friends to our north were hit much more drastically. Just, I know it doesn't take...
You got hit a day earlier than they did, by the way.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But when did you know things were going south up there? That put you on the spot.
No, because I can relive the whole week. We watched it. We watched the moisture coming in. We were excited about moisture coming in on the 9th. Tropical air mass had been over western Colorado and over Arizona, and then it shifted eastward during the day on the 10th. And on the 11th, stuff started to happen in a few places along the Front Range. But it was really when we watched that it was falling as tropical rainfall, not as our normal cold core, hail core. It was warm drops. That's always a warning to us that we're going to see more widespread, not necessarily as intense precipitation as some of our local convective cores, but more widespread, which was the big problem. It was widespread heavy rain. So as it unfolded the evening of the 11th, we could see this was quote unquote special. And then just watched it from there. Thanks to all the different sources of data, unlike storms of the past, some of you will remember the Frijoles Creek storm of July 1981, I think, with probably around 18 inches of rainfall, but we never knew really for sure because there was hardly any data whatsoever. We had 2,500 gauges to measure this past storm with. It happened where most of the people live and where much of our monitoring systems are.
That's where you are, isn't it?
And
It wasn't far at all from your
Yeah,
station.
yeah. So it was, and I think it was on a graph, I just didn't mention it. We're ranking it as, it's within the top 2 in terms of state damages done, sort of wrestling with the 1965 flood, and it's in the top 3 to 5 of biggest rain events in the state history. So it was a big one. It was probably not the biggest one, but it's right up there with the biggest that the state has seen.
Kelly?
This might be a dumb question, but
That was dumb too.
so with the ocean oscillations that kind of cause the La Nina, El Nino effect, how do you distinguish that between what people call climate change and then really what's going on with
The great challenge, and the two groups of people who know climate, typically know climate the best in terms of the working public, it's agriculture and it's water managers. And they're the ones who are most familiar with variability and oscillations, because they know there's been wet periods, they know there's been dry periods. So when you talk to water managers and farmers, it's very tough to get people impressed about climate change because this is, look at what we're dealing with already. Variability is what kills us. If we get gradually a little different, that's minor compared to this stuff. But it's all mixed up together, and that's why it's going to be incredibly challenging to unravel a larger scale driven climate change. I'm constantly concerned because projections for climate change say that the most vulnerable watersheds are the ones closest to Mexico. And as you go farther north, if anything, precipitation is likely to increase even as temperatures were to warm. But as you get about to the Arkansas River and the Rio Grande, you're in the area where the best knowledge of projections would say it will probably get warmer and it at best will stay the same for precip. And if it's warmer and same precip, you're talking about less surface water, more than likely. So I'm constantly watching, but I'm sort of in the camp of understanding, like the farmers and the water managers, is there are variations that are going to mask any systematic change for years and will keep us scratching our heads. But I'm assuming that what we're dealing with right now is not going to just stay this bad, that we will oscillate out of it, and El Nino is something everybody's excited about, but El Nino correlates quite well to improved moisture conditions in Texas. It correlates a little bit to improved moisture conditions in southeast Colorado. It's not necessarily a game changer unless it's prolonged. And prolonged El Nino does favor wetter weather, and prolonged La Nina favors drier weather. We have had prolonged La Nina, and it sort of correlated, so we're all optimistic now, but it's not a sure shot.
Let's give Nolan a round of applause.